Welcome to the final episode, the conclusion of our North American train trip across the United States as you might have experienced it in the 1950s or 1960s. A few days ago, we boarded the New York Central's 20th Century Limited passenger train at Grand Central Station in Manhattan. That took us on an overnight trip, 960 miles to Chicago, where we arrived the next morning. In Chicago, we changed stations and boarded the Northern Pacific Railroad's North Coast Limited passenger train for the remainder of the trip out to Seattle, Washington. And here's a photo of the New York Central's 20th Century Limited. And this shows the route we took, the New York Central from out to Chicago, and the Northern Pacific taking up over 2/3 of the route across the United States. This is the train we took from Chicago, the North Coast Limited, pictured just east of Livingston, Montana, along the Yellowstone River, the North Coast Limited with its 4 dome cars. And the next photo here is the North Coast Limited dropping down from Bozeman Pass, just having come through the Bozeman Tunnel a few miles east of Livingston, Montana. This is the route we took through Montana, which would have been in episodes 3 and 4, 2 episodes. And this is the route that we pick up today at the Montana-Idaho border and making our way to Seattle, mostly an overnight trip. Here's a Burlington Northern Santa Fe freight dropping down out of Sandpoint, Idaho on its way to Coeur d'Alene. We pull into the eastern part of Spokane, Washington at about 10:30 to 10:45 in the evening. It's dark now. This is the Big NP Yard on the east side of Spokane, aptly called Yardley. We're going to skip from here about 6 hours beyond and go to Ellensburg, Washington, where the train will arrive at about 4:30 or 4:40 a.m. Here they have an ice depot, and which has been under restoration. They have a caboose parked there. West of Ellensburg, we're going to come to a overcrossing of the Northern Pacific. This is the old Milwaukee Road as it crossed over the Northern Pacific main line, which you see below. Milwaukee went bankrupt in 1986. And their pathway through Washington, a good part of it, has been made into a bicycle path and a hiking trail. As we continue west, our area becomes a little more mountainous and we come to more rivers and lakes and streams. Up ahead here, we come to the little town of Cle Elum, Washington. Very cute town, which was an important part of the Northern Pacific in its day. At Cle Elum, these yards that you see here were full of coal. They had NP coal mines up in Roslyn, Washington, and they would bring coal down for the steam trains, and those yards would just be stacked with coal at one time. We get further into the mountains and big snow country. This is the little town of Easton, Washington, another small town that is extremely important along the northern Pacific. It was here that they would attach helper units to trains to get over Stampede Pass. They had a roundhouse here. They had a Y. You can see the abandoned Y in this shot as it comes off the main line. They had a depot, coaling tower, water tower. This is still a very cute town and well worth visiting if you ever get out in this direction. Not much has changed since the NP came through here. As we pull out of Easton, Washington, we come to one of the most difficult pieces of terrain on the entire Northern Pacific system. From Chicago to Seattle, there were three big mountain passes that a train would encounter. The first was the Bozeman Pass in sort of central Montana. Second would be the either the Mullen Pass or the Homestake Pass in western Montana. And this, the Stampede Pass in western Washington. Trains going up here would eventually encounter the Stampede Tunnel and then drop down into the Pacific coast of Washington and Seattle. Stampede Tunnel construction was begun in 1886 and completed in 1888. It was one of the most epic construction jobs along the entire Northern Pacific route. Part of it, just you can see the difficult terrain that's involved here. The closest railhead where they could bring supplies and so on to build a tunnel was in Ellensburg, which is probably 50 miles away from here. And they had to do it in the middle of winter to satisfy some requirements for land grants. So they started out on February 13th, 1886, putting equipment such as boilers and machine shops and everything they needed on sleds and bringing them through this terrain. And I wanted to encounter some of the difficult situation that these people did back in 1886. So, and I think it was the year 2003, on the same date, February the 13th, they began tunnel construction. I came up here, albeit on a snowplow. I happened to run into a fellow who was up here on a Burlington Northern snowplow, and he was surprised to see me up here because there's no road that goes over Stampede Pass. It's just the rail, and again, I had to take a snowmobile up here and surprised him. I told him about the history of Stampede Pass and the history of that specific date, the importance of it, and he said, gee, hop on board and I'll take you through the Stampede Tunnel. So that I did. Here we are coming out the western end of the Stampede Tunnel, and we're going to see the Mount Rainier pretty quick. It's a huge mountain. It's almost 50 miles away from here. There it is with a big cloud cover over it. It looks even huge from so far away. And then we head back east and go through the tunnel. There's a lot of people were killed on the construction of the Stampede Tunnel. Many Chinese on this side of the tunnel, and it's thought that there's a whole graveyard dedicated to Chinese builders. Nobody's been able to find it. The train up here has changed a lot. When at the time they were building the tunnel from 1886 to 1888, they had to build a series of switchbacks, railroad switchbacks over the top of the mountain in order to complete the line, in order to preserve their land grants. And this area on the east side of the Stampede Tunnel has been closed off for many a year now because it's Tacoma's watershed. The Green River flows down there. North Coast Limited passed over the river 11 times on its way down. It's a very circuitous route. Here we're coming out the eastern portal. They had to have men come out here and just shovel snow back in the old days before they got any sort of a decent snowplow operation. You can see my snowmobile up here. The camera I was using at this time, it was an older camera back in, I believe, 2003, and it did not like operating below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And this day it was about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And I tried to keep the camera in my jacket all the time, but I got this, you just saw it there, corrupted footage of the snowplow that I went through the tunnel on. This is Cascade, Washington, after we drop down onto the flats. Then we get to Auburn, Washington, which is one of the 3 most important shops on the Northern Pacific Line. There was Auburn, the big shops here, the big shops in Livingston, Montana, and then the shops out in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. This area between the street and the rail line was filled with Northern Pacific maintenance shops at one time, especially during the steam era. From here, we go up to Seattle and arrive early in the morning. Here's, on our way, we encounter Tacoma, and there's the Tacoma station. Here's the main streeter of the Northern Pacific. And you'll see the big tower of King Street Station on the right here as the Northern Pacific. North Coast Limited is finally pulled into Seattle. We'll take a look at the depot. Here's Seattle as it would have appeared at that time. We'll take a look at the depot, King Street Station, which was built in 1906 and then recently renovated. I think it was in 2013. They spent about $50 million on this renovation. The craftsmanship's very good. It looks really nice, looks nice and clean, but it's definitely not as colorful as it was before the renovation. And both the Great Northern and the Northern Pacific use this depot. Today it handles Amtrak, the Coast Starlight, and the Empire Builder. And it also handles the Seattle Sounder, which is Seattle's commuter train. From here we're going to take a look at some promo shots and postcards of the North Coast Limited, finish up with that. This is as we leave the depot. We're going to see a Northern Pacific kitchen and the dining car, and the dining room and the dining car, and coming up is the Lewis and Clark car, which was a lounge and food car. I don't think there's anybody happier than me to get this trip over with and on to new episodes. You may not have noticed it, but we had 16 changes of engineers and brakemen during the trip. I don't think any of them went more than 150 miles with the North Coast Limited. We had 11 changes of conductors and brakemen. The other train people were typically going on a round trip. They would get on the train, start their service in either Chicago or Seattle, make the round trip, and then get 5 days off. The NP employed 10 nurse stewardesses. Every stewardess was a registered nurse, and they rotated. The locomotives themselves were changed once. They changed out in Livingston. They had a 3-unit all the way to Livingston going west. And then they got a 4-unit locomotive heading west out of Livingston to tackle the Rockies and the big Cascades. We'll take a quick look at 2 new maps. The first showing the nights during the trip. We left in daylight about 5 p.m. out of New York and arrived in Seattle in the morning. Second map shows what geographic areas the various episodes covered. If you want more information on the North Coast Limited, you want to get this book, which is currently on Amazon. It's titled The Vista Dome North Coast Limited by William Kubler, Bill Kubler, who wrote this, and it's jam-packed with information. And look at all the photos he has in here. It's incredible. He's got virtually everything about the North Coast Limited that you'd ever want to know. Our next episode is going to be about Warren Mcgee, who was a conductor on the Northern Pacific. He started his service in 1936. His father and his grandfather worked on the Northern Pacific going back to the 1800s. And Warren carried a camera with him wherever he went, and he was one of the most famous railroad photographers in the world. And Warren has since passed away, but I interviewed him back in 1998. So this interview with Warren has been waiting over 20 years to get out of the can. It's never been seen by anybody but me. Also on that episode, we'll have some commentary on Warren by Jim Fredrickson and Jack Christensen, who are very well-known Northern Pacific historians. Those clips have been in the can over 20 years and waiting for me to do something with them. So that's it for now. Be sure and check out our next episode, and I want everybody to be healthy out there and be kind to your neighbor, and thanks for making it through the North Coast Limited transcontinental train trip with me.